Hey everybody, I'm John Van Duzer, CPA and partner with James Moore and Company, and I'm here with Suzanne Forbes, our managing partner and fellow real estate team member, and we're continuing our conversation on estate planning for real estate professionals. So Suzanne, we're going to talk about transition planning and contingency planning, which has been a really big focus for our firm for the past few years. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So I think this is something that really I feel like has been brought to light in our firm. We've really thought about this a lot. It's no secret in the U.S. You have an aging baby boomer population that started early, started their own businesses, built successful businesses, and now are getting to the point where they're looking at retirement and other things. And so really trying to say, hey, do you have a plan? And are you able to exit the business on your terms, and then contingency planning says, well, what happens if there's an untimely death? Are things still gonna work and run efficiently? And so this is something we've really worked with our clients on, and seen stories that were great and seen stories that weren't so great. So what are some considerations when you start really kind of delving into this area of transition planning and contingency planning?
Well, I'll start with, first of all, I always joke with clients and say, you're going to transition your business at some point in time, because that is inevitable, right? 100% of people at some point will transition. And the joke always is that I'll transition in 5 years. And that's because 5 years is just long enough that you don't actually have to do anything right now. Mm-hmm. And then in another 5 years, it's 5 years, and it's 5 years, and it keeps kicking the can down the road. So sometimes it's almost better to start with contingency. What if you got hit by a bus tomorrow? I mean, I'm really optimistic, so I like to say win the lottery, but that's not in this situation. The situation is, what if you get hit by a bus tomorrow? And I had a large real estate client. I asked that question. I said, so what happens if you get hit by a bus tomorrow? What does your family do? And they said, well, they call you. And I said, well, that's great. They call me, and then what do I do? Because I don't know how to run your business. And so we use that as a launch pad. Okay, let's say they do call me. Here's what I need to know. First of all, I need to make sure, we talked in an earlier segment about trust and assets. And so I need to make sure I understand all the assets. A lot of times we have a pretty good knowledge of what all the assets are because the tax impact on them, but not always sometimes. And then I need to know what your wishes are. And then I need to know who can run your business.
Yeah.
Who do I call, or who is in your business that knows how to run your business? And if you don't have somebody inside your business that can do it, then you need to go find one of your closest peers that you respect, and you need to be their contingency plan, and then they can be your contingency plan. Mm-hmm. So that I know in real estate, I need to go call so and so who's a property manager that knows how to manage these commercial properties for you, for your family. Now, it may be a family member, and if it's a family member, then I need to know who that family member is, and then we can sit down and have that conversation with the family member. So there's who's going to run your business. What is going to happen to the business if something happens to you? Is this a fire sale? Are we just going to have vultures at the door? Is there enough income and cash in the business to be able to keep it going for a while? Or is there life insurance to be able to keep it going for a while? So who's going to run that business while we're going? And then what happens to the business? Who takes it over long term? So there's that immediate mention of who's going to run. And I mentioned in the earlier segment about durable power of attorneys, because if you have a trust, it's great because trustee immediately gets to step in. If you have assets that aren't in a trust and you're still alive, then you need to have a durable power of attorney to appoint somebody to step in, or make sure somebody else is on the bank account at least and can sign things on your behalf. And if you pass away, then it might go through legal proceedings, which may take some time. So it doesn't, everybody thinks it happens pretty quickly, and it doesn't, and that's where there can be difficulty. So that's your contingency plan, and I think that's where you start with, is because once you have your contingency plan in place for a disability or a death, then it can roll into, what does my transition plan look like next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you start to spot gaps, and if you get to a point where you say, gee, I don't have a good contingency plan, then that should be your next goal, on working on? Do you need to bring somebody else along in the business? Do you need to start bringing another family member in? Do you need to start building a relationship with a trustee that, so that way they have a pretty good knowledge of what's going on? Like, you really have to sit down and say, hey, if I'm not here, who's going to manage my business affairs? Who's going to manage my real estate portfolio? Who's going to manage these things and make sure that we're still making good decisions, so that way my heirs don't just really lose out or get taken advantage of because of how complicated everything is. Another interesting area that we deal with quite a bit is buy-sell agreements, right? So, it's one thing to think, okay, I have this entire real estate empire and I control 100% of everything, right? And you really have to think through that. But what happens when you have partners? And one of the pieces of advice I got one time was, they said, hey, do you like your partners? And you say, yeah, absolutely. We're partners. We've been partners for a long time. I trust them 100%. And they say, great. Do you like their spouses? And you say, well, oh, wait a second. That's a little bit tougher of a question sometimes, and so really trying to think through, what if one of your partners passes away? Is their spouse or their kids gonna see things the way that your partner did? Or are they gonna see things through a different lens that potentially could cause issues? And so the buy-sell agreements are pretty critical. Suzanne, what has your experience been in that?
Well, unfortunately, I've had good and bad experiences with partners in a partnership or a corporation that are together. And you're exactly right that if you pass away and you have a partner, your spouse, immediately, or your heirs, is looking for the money from that business. Mm-hmm. And the biggest issue becomes, what's the value of my interest? So what is the value? What is it worth? If I pass away and my husband inherits my business, what is the value he's going to get? Because, John, if you and I are in partnership together and I pass away, I don't think you want to be in partnership with my husband, and I don't think my husband wants to be in partnership with you. But what he's looking for is the money. Show me the money to be able to buy my interest, because, of course, my husband will think it's worth $1 million, and you think it will be worth $100,000, and there becomes a disconnect. Mm-hmm. And so it's an issue of, first of all, what happens to my interest if something happens to me? Are you in business now with my spouse or my kids? I mean, you could be in business, if I don't have a spouse, it could be going to my kids, and now you got my 4 kids as heirs, or whatever the situation is. I just met with a client, and her husband just passed away, and she has 11 kids, and one has passed, and there's 2 grandkids, so there's 12 heirs to her estate. And I was talking to her, and I said, it only takes one to cause a problem. And generally, if there's 3 heirs, we're going to have an issue with one of them. One of them is going to think that there's a lot more money there than what they're getting, or they're going to have different opinions. I mean, it's generally that way, unfortunately. I mean, sometimes not. And so the buy-sell lays the terms out of, if John, you and I are in partners together and something happens to me, that you are required, my spouse, my husband, is required to sell it back to you. So, or not. The question is, you have to answer that question. Are they required or not? And if they are required, how do you determine the price? And that also can be outlined. It can be done through, valuations, and you can have 2 independent evaluations, or one, and then you do a third one if you can't agree. It could be a fixed price that you look at every year. And real estate, you could do a cap rate calculation, and you could outline your cap rate calculation as, this is how we're going to do it. And then once you come up with a price, the question is, how is it going to be paid out? Is it going to be paid out immediately? Because you may not have the cash to pay it out immediately. Is it going to be paid out over a 5-year period or a 10-year period, and at what interest rate? So those are the typical topics that should be addressed in a buy-sell for agreement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the important thing there is that flexibility to denote, how it's valued. Is there a requirement to buy, or is there a first right of refusal, or how it's all laid out? That one of the things I really like is what's called a trigger option, where I can make an offer to buy your interest, And if you decline it, then you're required to buy mine at the same terms, right? So it helps keep you honest because you're not going to over or undervalue an interest if you know that it could be flipped on you. And so that's personally one of the things I really like. And then you kind of touched on it, but I think talking about it directly. So you and I are in a partnership, and we say, great, we own this asset, we know how to value it. And in the event of a partner's death, has to be purchased within 6 months, right? Well, what happens when you pass away and I don't have the money to buy? What should I be thinking about today while we're both still alive and happy and everybody thinks life is wonderful? What are things I should be thinking about today?
Well, and it's a good point, and I always like to tell people because they put the partnership agreement together, and I'm an optimist, but when I look at partnership agreements, I'm a very big pessimist because I tell people when people look at agreements when something goes wrong,
Yeah.
right? When things are good, nobody looks at the agreement. When things go wrong, what does the agreement say? And so they immediately pull it out, and so you have to look at agreements assuming something has gone wrong. And you have to take it worst case scenario. And I do that when I talk with clients. I sit down talking to them. They go, "Oh, well, that's not going to happen. I trust them." I'm like, "Well, but that's great. Then let's not have an agreement if you trust them." But obviously there's an agreement for a reason. So let's make sure that agreement says what will happen. And so one of the big issues is liquidity. And I always talk to people, and our real estate folks, they're dirt rich but cash poor. So there's lots of assets, but they're tied up in dirt and they're tied up in buildings, and they're not liquid. And it takes time to be able to liquidate them or finance them, to borrow the money. So a lot of times, although I know a lot of people don't like life insurance, but there is appropriate times when life insurance is necessary. And that's one of those times when you are dirt rich and cash poor and you need to have cash quickly. That's a time when you need to be looking at having life insurance to adequately fund the buy-sell agreement. And that's what we typically will see. We will see life insurance policies put in place that need to be revisited. And the problem with life insurance is it can be cheap while you're healthy, but then if something happens to your health and you can't get it, now you may be in a situation where you can't fund enough life insurance to do the buy-sell agreement. And then you have to start looking at other avenues, which would be, financing it yourself, that the heirs wouldn't get the cash right away and hold the note, but they're taking risk and lots of other things. But I think that's where your life insurance comes into place for a buy-sell agreement. I know we're going to do another session on estate tax planning, and that life insurance also becomes, this is an estate issue because of the buy-sell, but it can be a bigger issue from an estate standpoint for having to pay estate taxes. So sometimes the life insurance isn't just for purposes of doing a buy-sell between partners, but it also might be to pay estate taxes potentially, because particularly with real estate or in any business, I mean, we're mainly talking about real estate here, but with any business, you don't want to be in a situation where you have to do a fire sale, where you have to cash out because you have no other choice. And we all know what happens when you're doing a fire sale. You're not going to get money from the business that you should have.
Right. And that's the biggest issue, right? You're protecting your heirs from being taken advantage of, and having liquidity to pay estate taxes or to pay or for your partners to be able to make good on buy-sell agreements really helps put you in a stronger position, so that way that wealth can be maintained, and that's the most important consideration here. Kind of to wrap this up into transition planning, contingency planning, I think the other thing you really have to think about is other financial things. So for instance, like debt and debt covenants. Have you seen anything related to this?
Well, I think that the issues we've had with debt is the personal guarantees, and what happens with the personal guarantees when the person that personally guaranteed it passed away, because that debt actually can become due. And we've had that situation, and typically a trust can't guarantee the debt. So you run into these issues when you do start putting these assets in trust, and the assets owned by the trust, but the debt's personally guaranteed by you individually, and the banks, and so generally we're finding the banks will work with that. they'll understand, but they're going to want to know what your contingency plan is, or what happens to these assets and the heirs, and they can force your hand or your heirs or your trustee to sell those assets to pay off that debt, because they don't have your personal guarantee anymore. Yeah. And particularly if those the debt might have covenants that there's a debt to asset ratio and certain assets are changed because of the inheritance. Now you run into this. Yep, the domino effect on that.
Yeah, and I had a client that he ended up having to switch lenders because there was a covenant that said the death of the guarantor was a condition of default, and that debt was in a trust, just like you said. And he's sitting here saying, hey, there's a 40% loan to value. This is as safe of a loan as a bank can make. And now you're going to tell my kids who are grieving the death of their dad that, oh, by the way, you're in default on this property. It's a very tough thing to deal with, but it's something you want to contemplate in advance, so that way you don't create this domino effect of not having cash to pay life insurance, not having cash to be bought out of interest, running into default on properties where you have to do a fire sale. You could see where you could evaporate a lot of wealth very quickly if these things aren't adequately thought about and planned for and addressed, while things are still good. So that's about the time we have today. We're going to continue our conversation and talk about estate taxes, which I think is everybody's favorite subject. So I hope you can join us. Thanks.
To learn more about James Moore & Company's real estate accounting and business solutions, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our Real Estate Industry Update series to receive updates when new videos are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us through our website or email us at info@jmco.com. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape of real estate continues to rapidly evolve.